being here, everybody. Can you hear me okay? I know I've got this time to 15 minutes, okay? Here we go. All right. My name is Mark Lewison from Farmingdale State College. I only have 15 minutes, so I'm not going to read the title of my talk to you. I've broken this into 3 equal parts. First, what was the New York experience? Second, how did it get made? And third, why I think it's a missing link in the study of themed experiences. Now, I took the term mind-boggling from this 1-minute local television commercial for the New York experience that ran in 1979 when I was 13.
The New York Experience. New York's longest-running multi-screen extravaganza.
The sound effects, the music, the whole thing is just terrific.
The New York experience was mind-boggling.
Fast-moving.
I've never seen screens that big.
It's fantastic.
It was overwhelming, all that sound and all those screens. And
the incredible New York experience. McGraw-Hill Building, 6th Avenue at 49th Street.
So the New York Experience show was located in Rockefeller Center, only a block away from Radio City Music Hall on 6th Avenue, right in the middle of Midtown Manhattan. The show operated from September of '73 to January of '89. More than 15 years, highly unusual for a standalone, paid admission, film-based attraction. Let's go see the show, shall we? First, we enter through the sunken plaza entrance. We have to stop at the ticket counter, no online sales in 1973. And visitors moved from the ticket counter to a themed area called Little Old New York. There was a mock-up of an elevated train station hearkening to the long-gone 6th Avenue L, complete with steam engine sound effects. Visitors then went down that escalator to a sub-basement, which was 2 levels below the street. And Little Old New York was this kind of turn-of-the-century pre-show waiting area. And this part was actually free. Your paid ticket then brought you into the Translux Experience Theater. And that was a custom-built theater that was state-of-the-art for its time. The main screen was comprised of 7 10-foot wide panels. The panels were used to show widescreen panoramas like this, or each screen could be used for a single image or any combination thereof. An additional fabric screen was stretched behind the main screens to capture ambient lighting effects. And each side also contained 3 screens that raised and lowered, and American flag bunting would pop out at the end of each show. You can see that at the top of those screens. The 300 seats in the theater swiveled to take in all sides. There was a quadraphonic sound system with speakers in all 4 corners of the theater. Quadraphonic sound was state-of-the-art hi-fi audio at the time. Now it's a memory. Some of the theater's chairs had speakers mounted underneath to simulate dialogue from fictional audience members. And there was a giant subwoofer built beneath the floor that was used to rumble the room and simulate the sound of a passing subway train. The projection booth had 30 to 40 slide projectors, 3 to 4 movie projectors, depending on when you visited it. The show was computer controlled and synced using 1973 computer tech. The show included 2,400 slides and 3,500 feet of film. It was a 55-minute barrage of images and sound like this presentation. This is inside the projection booth. The show gave a history of New York City, but much of the presentation was non-linear, just flashing sights and sounds of New York City, warts and all. There was even a scene that simulated a mugging. The New York City Convention and Visitors Bureau begged to have it removed. That request was denied. There were special effects, bubbles for Prohibition, sea-scented fog for scenes of the harbor, Chinese lanterns lowered for the Chinatown scene, and my favorite highlight, the hanging of Nathan Hale, whose effigy would drop from the ceiling after audio of his famous last words. On one occasion, the captain's pants fell off. On another, the rope snapped and the mannequin fell into the front row of seats. The show played hourly, 10 times a day, 7 days a week, including weekends and holidays, for more than 15 years. About 6 million people saw the show in this one 300-seat theater. Now, how did this show get made? At the bottom, it says, a Translux Bing Crosby production. What, Bing Crosby? Yes, that Bing Crosby, America's first multimedia star, renowned for his successful radio shows, a superlative recording career. White Christmas is still the best-selling single of all time, and an Oscar-winning movie career. But Bing was also a savvy investor as well. His business interests ranged from Minute Maid orange juice to getting in on the ground of magnetic tape recording. He jumped in when his friend David Sachs, a retired vice president of ABC Television in San Francisco, proposed the formation of a new entertainment venture that he was developing with his daughter and son-in-law. David Sachs' daughter and son-in-law wanted to develop a tourist attraction for San Francisco's Fisherman's Wharf, and Sachs had ideas and creative production people in mind from his days at ABC. Electrovision was born, the creative people were hired. The first Electrovision show was Bing Crosby's San Francisco Experience, which opened in 1970. It was a hit. Exhibitors began making inquiries. Electrovision started looking for a second market. The idea was to franchise. The next show was Bing Crosby Presents the Hawaii Experience, which it opened in 1971, booked into a lobby theater at the Waikiki Beachcomber Hotel. And then there was the New York Experience. Electrovision found its New York partner in this man, Richard Brandt, chairman of the Translux Corporation, who had been born into the family business. Translux was a perfect partner for the experience shows. Translux's businesses were projections, screens, and entertainment. Translux invented backlit projection screens that could be seen without dimming room or house lights. One application was the stock ticker projector, which could be found in every brokerage office and on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange. Translux had been operating movie theaters for decades and dominated the newsreel theater business. Backlit projection allowed for well-lit theaters, which made a great deal of sense for a theater that showed shorts and newsreels all day, and patrons came and went. Translux also pioneered the art house theater. Translux owned the technology for news ticker crawls and other electronic switching equipment during the original heyday of neon signage in New York's Times Square. Translux in the 1960s brought shows like Felix the Cat and Speed Racer to children's television, and Translux embraced the electronics age of the 1970s with personal stock tickers and some of the earliest prototypes of what we would today call a Bloomberg terminal. And there's the presser for the New York Experience, director Rusty Russell, who also directed the San Francisco and Hawaii shows, Translux Entertainment Vice President Bud Levy, New York City Mayor John Lindsay, and of course Bing Crosby and Richard Brandt. Translux paid for, built, and operated the New York Experience Theater for its 15-year run. And then Translux doubled down and produced another experience show at a newly revitalized South Street Seaport, originally called South Street Venture and later renamed the Seaport Experience. But Richard Brandt wanted more. He thought that ordinary theaters were too static and were doomed. So Translux tried to build its own Star Tours in 1979. Just look at that picture. It was called Spaceworks. They never got the tech to work, but this is something that we see now on the IAAPA show floor outside and all over the place for years. There were a few other experience shows, like the Taiwan Experience, which was shown at Expo 74, the World's Fair in Spokane, Washington, Bing Crosby's hometown. There was a Hollywood Experience that opened in Los Angeles in '80 as part of an ABC Studios tour. It actually, you may remember, it played in Orlando at the Stars Hall of Fame Wax Museum in the early '80s, if you remember that. And there was a London Experience, although the Experience brand was borrowed by one of those creatives, without permission. That's a whole other story. Rusty Russell, the director of the original 3 Experience shows, also created Where's Boston for the 76th bicentennial. He also directed the Louisiana Journey Boat Dark Ride, which was the signature attraction for the '84 Louisiana World Expo in New Orleans. Now, I've said that the New York Experience is a missing link. What am I talking about? What's being bound together? What are the branches that led to the New York Experience? Well, in interviews, David Sachs explicitly mentioned Expo 67, the World's Fair held in Montreal, as being influential. Expo 67 was an encompassing total environment that spawned many filmic innovations. Multiple screens were used, for example, in the show We Are Young. Kaleidoscope and Labyrinth were multi-screen total environments. Polar Life had multiple screens and a rotating audience. Of course, Canada 67 was filmed in Walt Disney's Circle Vision 360, and the Czech Pavilion exhibit, which I can't pronounce, was a wall of moving cubes, each with a slide projector inside, showing 15,000 slides in 14 and a half minutes, like this presentation. But I want to keep going back in time in the story. Translux's Richard Brandt had visited the 39 New York World's Fair as a 10-year-old, and this experience infected him with that need to improve on the movie theater. So for the 1964-65 World's Fair in New York, Brandt involved Translux extensively as a contract exhibitor and as a vendor of screens and electronics. For example, Translux operated the theater at the Cinerama produced To the Moon and Beyond, which was projected onto this, you can see it, this enormous half sphere, the exterior of which had been sculpted to mimic the moon's surface. Another influential exhibit at the 64-65 New York World's Fair was the IBM Thinking Machine Egg. Do you see the wall of people sort of in the center below there? Designed by renowned architect Eero Saarinen in partnership with Charles and Ray Eames, inside that literal wall of people watched the Charles and Ray Eames film Think, a sliding film show projected onto multiple screens. There's a lot of literature on the work of the Eames office, but I want to go back even further. Before cinema, before World's Fairs, the French cinematography historian and curator Laurent Manoni wrote that the dream of being able to project moving illuminated images on a wall or screen is almost as old in the history of humanity as the dream of flight. And Manoni's book begins with the prehistoric discovery of the camera obscura, which just means dark room, which itself became the basis of photography, and that's been used throughout history to entertain and edify. In the 17th century, the magic lantern, or lanterna magica, is developed. It's essentially a rudimentary slide projector. Slides were painted on glass. The magic lantern is used to entertain and educate for the next 3 centuries, both privately and commercially. It's an actual commercial enterprise and people pay to see these shows. Multi-lens or multiple projectors allowed for elaboration and motion. These are magic lantern slides designed for motion. As lighting sources improved, larger audiences could attend, more elaborate physical and sound effects were added. Innovations like projection onto smoke and rigged theaters created otherworldly atmospheres which enhanced thrills and storytelling. Often magic lantern shows would walk the line between the scientific and the inexplicable, and horror was an obsessively favored theme. Elaborate horror shows called phantasmagoria were extremely popular in the 18th and 19th centuries. And the rigged theater was later adapted to 20th century cinema, used in the midnight spook shows of the 40s and 50s. Beth Cattleman at Ohio State has done some really interesting research on the midnight spook shows. And the films of William Castle in the mid-20th century often included bizarre theater effects like electric shocks, costume characters, and emergo, the new electronic process. See that? Which was really just a plastic skeleton on a string. Catherine Klepper at Rutgers Newark has a really interesting paper on William Castle's rigged theaters. So in a themed show attraction, the goal is this, a positive audience reaction, and modern shows still aim for that positive audience reaction. Modern shows do exactly the same thing that older shows have done. Media is mixed, there are practical gags, obviously technology brings new effects into the game, like 3D. These days we like to move our audiences around a lot in the show attractions, so there's the Hulk show in Dubai and the Nemo and Friends in Tokyo. So the New York experience, as I said, did what every generation of show attraction tries to do. It used existing technology to surprise and delight and inform an audience, although it did it at the cusp of the computer age with computers that we would call rudimentary. Rudimentary technologies and old ideas still serve the attractions industry well, so it's important to keep that eye on the past. Technology always sweeps society along, but the show is still the show, and the New York experience is still relevant. I mean, can this be pure coincidence? I think not. Look, there's the New York experience projection booth stuck to the ceiling, and there's even a physical dimension. So someone at Walt Disney Imagineering saw the New York experience on a school field trip in the 70s and 80s, and they were inspired. Thank you so much for listening. I'm Martin Lewison, and I appreciate the honesty.